DeFi Slate team.
What's up, y'all? Real quick, if you like the DeFi Slate content on Twitter and YouTube and Substack, please give us a like and a subscribe on this video on YouTube. Join our channel, join the community. We'd really appreciate it. We're pumping this stuff out for y'all as much as we can, and we really enjoy the support and the community that we've built. Thank you very much and enjoy.
What's up, guys? Welcome to the DeFi by Design podcast. Here today on Monday afternoon down in South Florida. Been here with Robbie this past weekend doing a bunch of DeFi business. It's been great, and the market is pumping. I don't know what's going to be happening when you guys hear this, but it's a good day today for the market. I think we're going to see a bit more hype come back to the narrative of DeFi and all of that. I mean, it seems as if SushiSwap had this VC news where they were selling these shares and everybody just was freaking out, and all of a sudden we've got this price floor. It's been interesting to see the development of a lot of these new tokens and new applications coming out during this kind of slow phase. I know we've got a lot of layer 2 scaling coming out between EIP 1559, which by the time you're listening to this, it is already going to be out. And there's going to be Arbitrum and Optimism launching very, very, very soon. Exciting stuff for the DeFi community at large. Now, today we have the honor of speaking with Anand and Kedric. They are DeFi experts. Well, maybe they're not self-proclaimed DeFi experts, but I'm sure they've done a whole lot of stuff in DeFi. And yeah, we're here today to speak about their entrance, what they're doing with their program, their experience, things that they've learned, and just we're here to impart some knowledge on you folks who are listening, who are in DeFi and can learn from some of our experiences. I'm going to pass it over to Robbie and let him get after it. How are you doing, Rob?
I'm doing well, man. Yeah, it's been a great weekend. I actually jumped out of a plane on Friday. That was one of the most just absolutely exhilarating experiences of my entire life. So anyone who's considering skydiving, I definitely recommend it. I'll be going again pretty soon. And yeah, market's been doing great. It's been a few days since we've done a podcast. To give you guys a little recap, Bitcoin's 40K, as Andy was screaming from earlier before we started recording. So everything's looking good. Rumors Amazon might accept Bitcoin and Amazon coin might be on the way. Ethereum EIP 1559 is looking great. NFTs are popping up all over the place. So everything's looking good. I'm excited to talk to Kedric and Anand from DeFi Masterclass. And we're all about this collaboration rather than competition type of philosophy on DeFi, and the space is still so new that there's plenty of value still to add. So I am interested in kind of hearing you, Anand and Kedric, you guys' story, how you guys got started, and really, what brings you to DeFi?
Yeah.
You want to give the background?
Sure. Yeah. So Kedric and I are really good friends, whether he wants to admit it or not. At least I call him my best friend. I don't think he says the same thing about me. But we've known each other for quite some time. And personally for me, I'll tell you about my journey and kind of what leads me to DeFi. But I think like a lot of folks out there, I acquired some Bitcoin, bought some Bitcoin, bought some ETH, and just been holding it for a while. But last year, after I left my previous company, I was at home with my daughter. COVID had happened. And I felt like I wanted to just roll up my sleeves and learn about something new, something that I felt was going to be a challenge for me to pick up. And I kind of fell into the world of DeFi through another mutual friend of Kedric's and mine. So kind of like I fortunately happened to get in around the summer of DeFi and just got obsessed with it because it felt like, just like, playing golf, right? There's just like the right number of hurdles to get good at it. And it felt challenging enough with all the interfaces that exist today. And it felt like a video game to me, and I kind of got into it last summer, and one thing led to another, and Kedric and I collectively made a ton of mistakes. On April 30th, and I remember the date because it's my wife's and my anniversary, I sent out this tweet where I'm like, hey, we have learned so much over the last year about what's happened to DeFi. It'd be awesome to do a course so that folks don't have to run into the same issues or make the same mistakes that we've made. And like, hey, if you're interested in learning about DeFi, just gonna apply here. And that kind of snowballed, and we got hundreds and hundreds of applications of people who are interested. Yeah, we kicked off our first cohort in mid-May, and we partnered with this website called Maven to host our content, and they've been great partners to us. But yeah, that's sort of like how this kicked off a few months ago, and here we are today. But that's sort of my brief story. I'll also let Kedric kind of, talk about his side, because I mean, I think his is a lot more interesting. Let me put it that way.
Yeah. So, I have kind of had an on-again, off-again relationship with crypto since like 2013. I've started a couple companies in this space. But more recently, I was caught up in DeFi summer. That was a lot of fun, obviously. Dabbled around yield farming a little bit, but really got it really into yield farming kind of late last year, beginning of this year. And it kind of opened my eyes to the possibilities. I wrote a couple posts around this with regard to, I think that we're onto something in terms of like a financial revolution, personal finance specifically, and financial revolution, of course, but specifically with personal finance, just because of the fact that the levels of yield and your risk adjusted returns in the space are absolutely nuts. And so that's where got really into yield farming. Wanted to build something in the space. I've been kind of collaborating with Anand for some time, talking about it. And we shared the view that, like, okay, this is obviously the future, but the biggest problem is it's just too esoteric, and it's super hard for people to approach. So we feel like education's got to be the start to this. And so that's kind of after Anand's tweet, we put our heads together and said, what would be like a first principles approach to trying to teach this, and how could we really make it as impactful as possible? And that's how we came up with kind of the curriculum for DeFi Masterclass, helping people get from zero to yield farming as quickly as possible. And we always notice, it's crazy, it's like whenever we actually help people get in there, start getting their hands dirty, working with different protocols, the moment they build their first yield farm, it's like a light switch goes on of like, oh my God, like their expectations about what a dollar should do for them completely changes. Like no longer are the days where it's like, oh, I'm comfortable with putting my money inside of like a CD or a bank account where it's earning me jack. Now it's like, well, for a commensurate amount of risk, I can go out and get 10x or 20x the yield. So it's just bonkers what's going on here, guys. I've never been this excited about technology, and I've worked my entire career in technology. I think the writing's on the wall that this is going to be bigger than I think what we even think it's going to be. And I think we're probably the guys that drank the Kool-Aid on this already. So.
Yeah, definitely. Are you guys doing a lot of yield farming on multiple chains? Kind of what's been your experience there? How's that worked out for y'all?
Yeah. So obviously on Ethereum, I like Ethereum. It's just you can't do it with small amounts of money. You got to do it. I mean, like the gas fees suck, and it's never fun to pay like whatever $20 or $30 to deposit some capital into a liquidity pool. But so I do farm on other chains, Binance Smart Chain, Polygon. I'm going to go over to Solana pretty soon. And it's a lot of great stuff. It's just obviously once ETH2 rolls out, I think we're going to see a huge leg up in terms of yield farming. I think that innovation's been stifled due to the fact that we have these really high gas fees. And so it's like, why would I go out and improve the UI UX if like I can't actually, like the underlying technology doesn't even support me trying to invest in that at all. So I'm really bullish on it once we get ETH2 rolled out. And I think it's going to be, I think that the types of yield opportunities are going to compound. I think there's going to be all kinds of ways we'll make money and earn yield in this space in the future. So I'm just really excited about that.
Yeah. What have you all seen kind of in the demographic of people that have taken your course and that you've interacted with in the space? Where is their head at? How involved are they looking in, and kind of what role do they want to have? Do they want to yield farm consistently? Do they want someone else to do it for them? And kind of what are their hesitations? What are their concerns for taking the leap and getting into DeFi?
Yeah, you want to take it on it?
Yeah, I'll touch on the demographic piece, and then Kedric can probably talk about their experience. On the demographic side, we've seen predominantly managers of family offices, hedge fund folks, venture capitalists, And there's been some outliers, I think but that's sort of like where, if I had to pick a specific category, that's sort of where it lies at the moment. If I had to pick a persona. We've seen folks from, we've seen developers, we've seen folks who are on the cusp of starting something. I saw in Kedric that one of our attendees in this cohort is, worked at a unicorn in sales, a unicorn company in sales based on New York, and now wants to make the transition into the world of DeFi exclusively. So like, it's a little interesting. We're getting to meet some really cool people through this process. But I'll turn it over to you, Kat, in terms of like how they approach yield farming and what happens downstream, because I know Kat works a little bit more closely with some of these folks.
Yeah. So I think kind of, as I mentioned before, it's the yield is too high for people to ignore. And it's funny, there's I was doing office hours with some people teaching people how to yield farm. They had some questions. And so it was myself, a partner at a venture capital firm, some executive in some Silicon Valley company, and then another kind of high net worth individual. And we were farming on Ethereum. I remember we went to somebody was sharing their screen. They were trying to submit a transaction, and it was literally all 4 of us or 5 of us that were sitting there and waiting for the transaction to clear. And I was like, oh my God, if that's not an indication of like how bullish that we should all be on this space. It's like you have some very, very impressive people in their own right that are waiting around 5 minutes for a UI, UX to clear a transaction, just sitting there. It's just insane that we were doing that. But that's kind of the case in point around kind of the why I think this industry is going to grow so much, is like our UI, UX right now is god awful, and yet we're still willing to suffer through it. So that's kind of an aside. But to answer your question directly, that there's a lot of people want yield for sure. They want to look at that. Their expectations around what a dollar can do is just completely different now. But in addition to that, what's really interesting is people are, and I think Anand's touching on this, they're shifting their careers. Like we almost we should have a disclaimer. It's like, if you take this course, careful, because it might put you into a situation like some cognitive dissonance where you no longer want to actually work on whatever freaking business or industry you're in. You're going to drop everything and go over here. Because we've seen it happen several different times where we have executives who are pivoting their company entirely towards this, or people who are very promising careers at some very well-known companies that immediately stop what they're doing and go and look for a career in DeFi. So that's certainly a component of it. I think the other interesting thing is like there's a very there's a component of it of like the fact that I think there's a lot of people that are very interested in the fact that you're able to, this industry has the potential to bank the unbanked, which has really what we're talking about is like actually significantly decreasing or ending poverty in a lot of nations. And so I think there's a lot of people who are coming to this saying, altruistically saying, this is we're doing good work here, and we got to focus our attention here. So I think it's kind of a mixture of all those, of like yield, just the fact that this looks like it's the future, and altruistic aspects of why people join the course and what they look to get out of it.
Yeah, I'll piggyback on that last point a bit. In terms of these people altruistically coming out and supporting the system, yeah, that is what they're doing, because it is an inconvenience to kind of move away from what you're familiar with. But they're also self-inclined. They're incentivized to do so. So it's actually in their economic best interest to act altruistically. And I think that is one of the pillars of cryptocurrency, and it's been a main ethos, which is great, because I mean, it's better for everyone, really, if everyone kind of supports each other. And what we're kind of seeing, I guess, is I see a potential rift, and I'm not sure if you guys see it as well, but between these anonymous developer teams and more the VC type of other side of the spectrum. We've seen now there's decentralized teams getting VC investment, so there's potential for an integration there, and those two kind of sides to meet. But there's also been, some animosity between anonymous developers kind of just not really supporting the ecosystem from an investment standpoint, being more community and grassroots driven. And then the more traditional route and seeking investment and going that route. And I'm interested, just kind of in your perspective on that, if there's kind of a better path forward, or if really it's just integrating between the two, and that'll be the way that everyone can kind of gain the most effective value from this.
Yeah, I can take a swipe at that. And I mean, I feel like I represent both sides in some ways. I'm a builder, I'm a developer at heart, I'm a VC, and I belong to many communities. So, so a few things about VC, right? Like VCs are, I think everyone's greedy, but VCs are long-term greedy. The goal is not to be short-term greedy. Like that's a different kind of investor. And when you think about the value add that VCs bring to various teams, right? And I've seen this both as an entrepreneur who's raised capital for some of the best VCs, and now as a venture capitalist myself, we can, VCs can come in and provide, and they have such a holistic lens, right? Like as a developer, as an operator, as a protocol developer, like you go several miles deep and maybe a couple of inches wide. And VCs have to be several miles wide and maybe a couple inches deep in each project. But with this broad lens, they're able to see a lot as to what's happening in the landscape. And the best VCs can give you guidance and advice and pattern match it very effectively. They can see, okay, that's what's happening over there. And these are the trends that we see happening. And here's how it can impact your project. And I like to think of the best investors as literally performance coaches or your best therapists, really. Like that's what they are. That's why they're there to help support you. And this thing, I'll connect this back to what you were asking earlier. These are two different entities. They're like, the incentives are aligned here, right? When a protocol developer wants to go raise capital, they can raise capital through institutions like VCs, or if they're more mature and they're ready for a token sale, then they can raise through a token sale. With the VC approach, and of course, there's many protocol developers who've done token sales and then done a follow-on VC round, right? And I think, there's many protocols that I can allude to that are doing this. And of course, 𝗪𝗓 is kind of like in the middle of this as we're recording this right now. To the end of the day, it's about community and for the protocol developers to figure out if the incentives are aligned. Do we take money from these people? And if so, what can they do for us? And those are all the right questions to be asking.
I think it is a concern about centralization. If these VCs kind of coop up or not monopolize, I don't think they can quite get to that extent, but gain a large portion of a lot of different projects. I think that's the concern when these pillars of finance start to get decentralized again. Are we kind of just following the same path of history that led us down this path?
Yeah, that's again, there's the ability to hold tokens, and then there's participants, there's investors, there's like different entities, right? And if all the token holders are all the same, then the incentives are not aligned well. And I think that's where the protocol developer can take a stance on how they want to approach this. But at the same time, if you think about someone who's sort of pre-product, right, and that's typically where the earliest VCs tend to dabble. Someone's taking a bet on you. Someone's going to give you a bunch of money and say, hey, like someone wants to build a team of 20 developers, build a great project, and they need some capital, some runway for that. VCs are naturally, take risks in those regards when they're able to check off all these different boxes and contribute capital and knowledge to get some of these teams off the ground, for which they get a commensurate amount of equity in the company, right? So, but no, I don't disagree that I think as the project starts to mature, there's going to be a natural demand for these tokens. And I think it's going to be invariably hard for VCs to play that game downstream. Like that's challenging unless the protocol developers, like the initial straw man that came out from 𝗪𝗓, right? Like, hey, maybe we'll offer a discount, etc. To which the community rightfully revolted and said, this doesn't make any sense. Like, why would you want to do this at this point? In fact, there's people out there, there's entities out there, again, not necessarily people, by the way. There's institutions, like I said, that said, I'll buy the same number of tokens without a discount, right? So I think it's about where the money tends to aggregate. And I don't disagree. I think, disarming or rather spreading the wealth, I think is a noble goal of DeFi. And I think we'll all be better off if we work towards that.
I really just find it interesting that early on, it was I guess more so in the Bitcoin days, 2013, even before that, 2010, all the way through like 2014, it was insight, and you kind of had to know a guy. And now I think it's more about timing in terms of kind of how you find out about these opportunities.
Sure. Yeah.
Insights will always go a long way, though.
Right. Yeah.
Yeah.
I disagree.
So it's interesting stuff when you combine these different entities of people, and get them to align themselves to create the success of any given project. You have all these sectors of DeFi that is kind of a part of a greater whole. Anand, I'm curious what your mental model is on investing in different sectors of DeFi. So is there a sector that you're more bullish on, or is there a sector in which you have found yourself spending more time doing research on? You too, Kedric, I'm keen to understand what sector of DeFi you guys are really excited about, and kind of where your mental models are as far as investing in particular areas of DeFi.
Yeah, I can start, Kedric, and I think we have different rubric. We have a different rubric, each of us, right? And I think it'll be interesting color. To me, I think in when it comes to DeFi, I mean, it's still very early stages, and there's just so much development happening here. Where I see a lot of, particularly I'm interested right now, and I mean, so Kedric and I, we have this like stack diagrams, block diagram that we use for our class, which, because I tend to think in that way. It's a very engineering centric way of thinking about things, and that's things stacked on top of one another. And, there's various, like everything from like the lowest transaction layers, like layer 1, layer 2, all the way to like front ends, like wallets and dashboards, etc. Right? So that's kind of like the stack diagram. So there's two things that I think I'm particularly interested in. One, as I look at it today, and this doesn't mean that I think the stack has a lot of value, and this stack on top of like another up and coming blockchain is even more interesting, right? So it could be Solana, it could be Algorand, it could be Terra. So I think there's a lot of build up on the ETH blockchain, and I think there'll be single purpose blockchains that come up, whether it's Flow or another one for NFTs, what have you, right? So like, I think there's a lot of opportunity here in the full stack. All that being said, particularly for me right now, is the on-ramp opportunities from for those who are not in crypto, right? Like that's what's most exciting to me. I think for all of us here listening, we get what DeFi is, and that's a term that we're familiar with, and it's kind of first-hand knowledge for us, even for your listeners to the podcast. But for me, what's interesting is, Kedric alluded to the unbanked. How do we get the other billions into the world of crypto and DeFi, right? Because this is, and Kedric and I talk about this a lot, which is we believe that this is going to be, I think you can see pictures of my daughter behind me, and I believe that in the next few years, she's going to be using crypto whether she knows what it is or not. And the question is, who are the developers who are building those on-ramps to make this the fabric of the internet? And that's super exciting to me. So I think outside of the world of DeFi, like, how do we get people into the world? And someone tweeted this recently, and I thought it was so amazing. It's like, I think the next $1 billion startup is a better DeFi user interface. Like that in and of itself, I think is a huge idea. I still believe that the on-ramps are going to be cool. I think using real world assets as collateral and bridging that into the world of DeFi, I think is a huge opportunity, kind of like what Centrifuge is doing as a protocol, and mass, making that more mass market, so to speak. I think is a huge opportunity. And the third bucket I'll say is actually a freaking idea. Like, I mean, there's just, it's not very smart people who are investing in this space, but I think to be thesis driven at this point, it's like saying, I know exactly, back in 1994 saying, by the way, in 2008, there's going to be a device that you can hold in the palm of your hands and on which you can listen to streaming music, or you can order a cab or something or deliver food to you. You could never have envisioned that, right? So I think we're like in the 1994 of this movement, and it's moving really fast, by the way, right? Like, but to think that we know exactly what's going to happen here, I think it's a tough call. And if that's the case, then you have a crystal ball that no one else has. So I'll stop rambling. I'm curious to hear what Ken has to say.
I agree with the assessment that being thesis driven at this point in time, in terms of specific vectors that will work out, is really, really tricky. If you kind of take it from like, I guess maybe it's more like first principles approach, like what's really happening here, and for me, in terms of how I think about this, I think we're seeing a migration from traditional finance into decentralized finance. The real fundamental innovation that's happening, though, is a dollar is no longer constrained inside of some sort of walled garden. A dollar in decentralized finance has the ability to zoom around all kinds of places and earn yield that was not possible for in centralized finance. In that old world, right, all innovation was permission. Now we're transitioning to a permissionless innovation world where innovation is stacking on innovation, and at each level are new yield opportunities. So I think what's happening right now, kind of the framework I'm using is like, oh my God, I have no idea what's going to happen now. But it's like, now we're actually seeing innovation and we're rethinking what a dollar can do. Like, we've all been trained because of traditional finance in terms of what is an acceptable risk reward for a particular dollar, right? In traditional finance, and part of this process is unlearning that. We can't operate under that model anymore, because now a dollar is able to go out and do all kinds of work and zoom around to all that different types of places. What is the implications of that in terms of GDP? You know, obviously one of the major factors of GDP is like capital allocation. Well, we're talking about potentially an orders of magnitude increase in efficiency of capital allocation in this new world. So what does that mean? I agree with Anand. Like, I don't know what this will turn into, but it is the most fundamental shift in terms of how commerce is conducted that I think we've ever experienced, even more so than the internet, in my opinion, because money is power in terms of economic power, economic activity that can be achieved, and now it's able to zoom around. What I'm looking for is like, I think what we're going to see is, like Anand said, new opportunities coming online that maybe never had the opportunity to gain access to capital previously. Maybe it's traditional offline type opportunities, but even new kind of stacking innovation on innovation, where like maybe this is maybe there's new types of yielding opportunities that like, for example, the metaverse. Like, there's an entirely new world that's being built in the metaverse that are going to have yielding opportunities in there that are going to be an entirely like explosion of growth and explosion of value in that. What does that mean? What does that translate to? I have no freaking clue. And that's why I think, from our perspective, the way we think about it is like, this is too big and moving too fast for any one individual or even group of individuals to do. That's small. You need a more kind of community type approach. And so that's what we're trying to do with DeFi Masterclass, and build out that community so we can share ideas and figure out what's going to happen. Beyond that, like, I think community tokens are really interesting. I think the ability to align incentive interests within amongst different stakeholders is we don't fully get how big that's going to be. But it's because we're going from the old world. We're needing to retrain our brains now. So, what is that? I know I'm not giving you any alpha in terms of what to go out and try to, figure out what's investing in. I think that the moral of the story is like, we don't know yet. This is too big to even try to pretend like we have an idea of what to go out and put money in. You just got to stay on top of it. And in my opinion, drop what you're doing and build your career in this space, because the amount of wealth that's going to be generated over the next 5, 10, 15, 20 years is going to be like nothing we've ever seen before in our lives, in my opinion.
Yeah. What we do know is what we've seen thus far. It has unlocked nascent markets. That innovation that you're talking about, creates value. And now it's kind of about, where does that take us? Now that there's new markets, how deep can we build that rabbit hole? And what can we make of it? So yeah, I really think the themes and growth vectors of DeFi are still being built. But we know the rails are lightning quick. So I'm curious, kind of, you know, who is going to adopt it? The capital efficiency here and capital growth is immense. So, you know, as the capital efficiency is sped up, some people are going to adopt this technology sooner. Some are going to adopt it later. What is your position on central banks, nation states adopting these currencies, these digital currencies, and if it can improve the life of their citizens, you know, how do they create the most effective solution there?
Yeah, it's great question. I mean, obviously, like, you know, obviously I'm extremely bullish on Bitcoin. You know, at some point in time, the equation is going to work itself out. Like, you can't just keep printing a bunch of money and expect everything to keep going on as it has in the past. It just doesn't. The math doesn't work out, right? So I think that certainly nation states are going to be interested in this. I'd say anybody who has money in a savings account, when they understand how to approach this and are given tools to be able to approach this, I think that you were talking about, like, what do we look for in terms of innovation of a product, right? Typically, you're like, well, you have to have a 10x in innovation in order for there to gain adoption. Typically, that's done in a very soft science way. Like, is this a 10x better user experience? That's not very quantifiable. With this, it's actually quantifiable. We know that you're getting 20x your return in, you know, let's say you get 10% return in DeFi for a savings account, and in you know, traditional banking, you're getting 0.5% return. So we know it's a 20x return. We know the math in theory is there to get massive user adoption towards that particular product. I think nation states are going to realize that this is a massive opportunity for them to be able to potentially, you know, not be so reliant on the dollar. And there's a lot of risk associated with holding dollars long term, in my opinion. What do I know? But and then thirdly, I think that we're going to find that CBDCs are, a lot of people say, like, they're worried, like, what are CBDCs are going to come out and nobody's going to want Bitcoin. They just want CBDCs. And they're just not understanding what Bitcoin solves and why CBDCs represent, from a pricing perspective, in my opinion, one of the most bullish things that could possibly happen. CBDCs, for the audience, is central bank digital currencies. So, you know, a digital dollar or a digital, you know, a digital whatever your centralized currency is. That represents effectively a pipeline of the irresponsible money printing from the government directly into this ecosystem. And so does that change the thesis and the use case for Bitcoin? No, it strengthens it. Now it's an easier way. Now you have more and more money chasing the same asset that is finite. So I think that it's an inevitability that they will adopt CBDCs long term and kind of end their relationship with, you know, they're gonna be separated from traditional finance at some point in time because of the fact that the amount of control that governments are going to be able to gain, and I don't know if this is a good thing, to be clear. I don't know that this is a good thing, but the amount of control that governments are going to gain through CBDCs in terms of being able to apply a scalpel of stimulus within the economy, right? And I use the example, like, imagine, God forbid, there was a pandemic and, you know, nobody went to restaurants for a year and that entire industry was decimated. Like, in the traditional finance world, they give some money to the banks and hope the banks will give it to the actual users. I equate this to, like, imagine you're at a dinner party, your champagne glass is empty. The host takes your champagne glass and sticks it at the bottom of those champagne pyramids and then pours the top, and, like, hopes that eventually your champagne glass will fill up. It's insane. This is, in CBDCs, they would be able to have the opportunity to go out and specifically stimulate any business owners that are restaurants. Say, here's $20,000 and you got 3 months to go out and spend this. So that type of finite control and the ability to apply a scalpel in terms of stimulation, I think, is going to be massive. But yeah, I think that's how those three different things kind of coming together, I think, is why this is not the only reason, but certainly major factors of why this is the future. Sorry, I'm going to stop rambling. I'm turning it on and get your thoughts on it, man.
No, I think, generally speaking, I mean, I think I'll just zoom out for a second. I think it's exciting for me because when you think about like traditional banking infrastructure, like how long that's been around and how many decades it takes, like, I mean, you would never, for example, be able to audit the code that runs inside of a bank like Bank of America or Wells Fargo. I mean, it's never going to happen, right? Like you just can't. You look at the world of like decentralized finance, how open and transparent it is, and how quickly, like if it's taken us decades to get to this level of like being able to bank online, how quickly DeFi is coming up. So it's all promising. I'm just glad that we've been having this conversation, or the fact that like now banks want to take this to the next level and think about CBDCs. I think it's a good thing, honestly, from a competition standpoint to have these CBDCs. I think it was the SEC commissioner, Pierce. I think she was on she was on a panel. I think it was all about Bitcoin or something a few days ago. I mean, I think she said it well. She's like, I actually prefer stable coins over CBDCs. Just because, I mean, CBDCs will have to force usage, you know, like, and that's not necessarily a great thing. Whereas stable coins are, you know, they're not, again, depends on which one you're looking at, right? Let's be careful about that as well, but they're generally accessible, right? Like it's not coming from a centralized authority, right? Kind of defeats well, I think it goes back to the concept, like, I wouldn't say defeat, but it just challenges the notion of decentralization to some extent. So personally for me, I think I'd rather hold like, you know, USDC or US Terra to a centralized, you know, CBDC. But, you know, again, I'm just like, to zoom out and just put things into perspective, I'm really glad we were having this conversation because, you know, this feels momentous in so many ways that we're able to have such conversations with what felt like, you know, large moving institutions that didn't feel like they could adopt, you know, new technologies.
Yeah. I support that. Yeah. I mean, I really agree with kind of Kedric, what you said about central bank digital currencies being a bullish event for the ecosystem. The way I see it, we have, you know, in America, we have capitalism. Private entities compete with public entities, and we have these privately created stable coins. And now we can have potentially a public stable coin in addition to those and compete. And I don't think there's any reason why the public shouldn't have access to the capital efficiency that DeFi unlocks. So yeah, I do see CBDCs as a bullish event, and just kind of interested what that means as far as the masses. If the CBDC works and the federal bank kind of adopts this digital currency, Anand, you mentioned, you know, whether your daughter knows it or not, she'll be using crypto. You know, what does that look like as far as someone using crypto but not really knowing that they are using it?
Yeah, and I think this goes outside of the world of DeFi to some extent, right? So I'll give you two examples. We'll start with DeFi first, but I envision a world in which, you know, there's a neobank, right? Like let's say she looks at going to college, and when I went to college, it was like an archaic process, right? I needed to go in and use this local credit union. I filled out an application. I was an immigrant and a national student, so I don't have a social security number. And all these things were sort of complicated, right? And you fast forward to today, and that landscape has looked very different. So we'll just take my daughter as an example. I think it should be relatively easy for her, right? Whether or not, you know, depending on, again, what they're looking for, but there should be an easy way for her to create, you know, an account somewhere where her assets can be stored, and using which she can earn high yield and not have to worry about, you know, the constructs underneath, right? So like that's the most basic, and that could be powered by DeFi, right? Like Kedric mentioned Anchor Protocol as an example earlier. I mean, you know, there should be a seamless way for someone to be able to tap into those kinds of yields, and I don't think those are going away. In fact, I think those are going to get bigger and greater over time. So I think that's one example. The second is, I mean, I'll just pick again one on-ramp like gaming, right? Like you look at 𝗵𝗵𝗃𝗃, you look at, you know, even Fortnite, right? Like you look at various different games, and there's this concepts are in there, like, you know, being able to sell skins as NFTs, or being able to use these 𝗵𝗃𝗃𝗃s, whatever the case might be. Like that is an on-ramp into the world of crypto, right? And I think those are just two sort of basic examples, but I see that becoming a lot more pervasive. I mean, you take Helium as like your decentralized Wi-Fi provider, right? Like, I mean, it starts to get so massive and pervasive at that point where every sort of like incumbent analogous solution starts to have a decentralized notion to it. Even, I mean, decentralized file storage, decentralized video streaming, decentralized audio streaming, right? Like all these things start to become more pervasive. And, you know, maybe like today Spotify's huge. Maybe it's Audius, right? Maybe it's Theta for video streaming, whatever, right? Like maybe there's a new messaging app that comes up that's not, you know, Facebook Messenger or WhatsApp, or, you know, more along the lines of what Signal has to offer. So I think that's where I think the entry points start to come in, where the, you know, this mission, like this middle entity gets broken up, and there's several nodes that are participating and therefore leveraging the value of the network, right? So you and I get to benefit from being the ones who power this network. So that's what it looks like for me at a high level. And I think we're on the cusp of this movement, you know, being very positive.
Right. It's the evolution of products that are able to be used by anybody, you know, our friends, our family, people that are completely unaware of what's even happening, and then making them so simple that, right, they are just using them, and it's just a matter of time until they understand the intricacies, and they, you know, kind of dive deeper into what could be, you know, and the potentials. I think, you know, Coinbase Earn as an example, right, where they pay out people to learn. Huge example about of kind of this model, like play to learn, earn. You know, it's very, very prominent in the current times, and I think Coinbase is a huge player in onboarding the masses to DeFi. So I'm curious what your thoughts are on onboarding people straight from Coinbase or from Gemini or Kraken or other large exchanges right into the DeFi world. You know, what are some of the improvements you guys think could be made, whether it's onboarding rate to layer 2, or what kind of education could we see? You know, how can we take the world of crypto from, you know, using decentralized exchanges and taking them into, you know, the self-custody route, the be your own bank kind of concept? What does that look like?
I think you're hitting on some interesting concepts, and I think it's probably an amalgamation of several things, in my opinion. To like, what's the ideal onboarding for people in DeFi? Education is critical, right? We can't even start to have these conversations of like convincing people to come over here without taking a very deliberate approach in terms of helping to educate people about it. That's why we started DeFi Masterclass. We think that this is the starting point. So we think about it as education and then enablement. So like, obviously, education, ideally in a gamified approach. Like, I'd love to see, you know, material, you know, orders of magnitude improvement on the UI UX. And then is there a way to be able to educate in a gamified approach and get people into this environment and make it fun, right? I think that's the key. Is like, remember, this is money. Money historically has a very emotional, it elicits a very emotional response from people. So how do you shift that, right? How do you shift that emotional response into something that they enjoy? Well, you got to gamify it, in my opinion. So a gamification of this would be huge. And then yeah, I mean, the good thing is like they're a large and growing, and the acquisition efforts of these centralized exchanges is extensive. They're spending a ton of money to bring people in. That's the first step. You gotta you know, turn your money from fiat to crypto, and they're doing that. And then the next step, in my opinion, is like, okay, what kind of experience can we bring people over to where they enjoy this and it's fun and it's gamified, so that you don't elicit the same kind of, you know, nervous response that you get when it comes to money. I feel like that's probably a big component of it, but like, yeah, that's why we think it starts with education.
Yeah. Kedric, I think that gets back to your point about altruistic, and really I see that as infectious in the ecosystem. Team building, I think, is intrinsic to that gamification model. And traditionally, finance has been so independent. People have been very private about, these are my funds, you know, I don't share these with other people. But getting into a gamified approach, you reach a pooled environment where there's synergy and people can support one another. And that's really what we see with all the tools in DeFi.
The community aspect of that is implicit in that gamified approach, or not typically, but I would look at it as implicit. And I totally agree. To be able to make this, plus it makes it a lot more approachable. That's what we find is like, people like to take our class together. They like to bring their friends in because it's a safety net in terms of, you know, they're much more comfortable going to their friends and being like, hey, do you get this? Like, what the hell is this guy's talking about? Like, do you get it? It's just, it makes it so that community aspect, which is so inherent to crypto, I think is a critical component. So yeah, you're absolutely right. And I think you brought up an excellent point in terms of what's necessary. Community's got to be at the forefront.
So you guys are working with quite a few people who are, I would say, you know, more sophisticated in terms of their approach to investing and DeFi, right? So a lot of people in DeFi, I would say a lot of them are younger folks. You know, there's a majority of retail investors, so you know, college kids, people who are working in finance or who have been in crypto for some time. You know, of course, you've got like the influencer crowd, and then you've got kind of this suits crowd. These more you know, proliferated people who are really into the nuts and bolts of the traditional finance world. So you know, I'm definitely curious to understand some of your experiences working with people in that kind of realm, and what you're seeing on that institutional level, interest-wise. You know, what are some of their interests? Where does it peak? Is it the stable coin rates? Is it the deflationary mechanism of ETH that's coming up? Is it the store of value of Bitcoin? You know, are they interested in the lending and borrowing? Like, what are some of the major interests of these larger institutional players or folks from Silicon Valley in DeFi specifically?
I can take a crack at, and then yeah, I'd love for your thoughts as well. I think the very highest level is there's two kinds of people. There's people who get it, there's people who don't. And then for those who don't get it, it's just like, you know, we can have all the conversations we want, and you know, it's scary for them, and they don't get it. So like, those people are already out. And I think the folks that you're talking to is like, we get it, we want to learn more. You know, what does this landscape sort of look like? Let's understand let's understand how the car works before we take it for a spin, right? So like, then that's kind of when Ken and I come into masterclass, and we get to talk to them about all these different like plumbing options that exist in the world of DeFi. And then now that last question, which is like, what's attractive to them? Again, it's about like, once they get an understanding of the landscape, what I've seen the best investors do is to be able to draw these parallels, and they go, all right, and I kind of see what this landscape looks like. I see how this car is working, you know, like, what is a faster car, more efficient, more effective car look like, right? So it's like, we have these gas-powered vehicles, and then, you know, like maybe there's an electric vehicle that can go much faster, right? And can be more efficient for the world. And that's kind of like, maybe the analogous there situation is like, hey, you know, layer 2 solutions, optimism, or, you know, maybe net new blockchains altogether that are hyper efficient to begin with, right? That use proof of stake or another consensus mechanism that's a lot more, a lot less like hardware intensive, and you know, has different mechanisms to it. So I think that's what I've seen investors sort of get into. Like, all right, I see this car now, I get it. How can we make it better, efficient? Or is it a car? Is it a motorcycle? Is it a plane? You know, does it need to be lighter footprint, heavier footprint? Do we cater to developing nations? You know, do these people have internet connections, right? So like, that's the kind of stuff. And then of course, how do we apply these to other parts of the world, right? Is it file storage? Is it, as I mentioned, wireless, so on and so forth. So I think there's a lot of things like that that are starting to get attractive. Like, how do we find the next big project that's going to, and that's what these investors are looking at is, you know, like, okay, this is how it works today. Where does this go from here? And then as this becomes the internet of like this decade, right? What does that mean? Like, what are these other applications that are going to be built on top of it? Where does the value start to accrue? Where do we start to support or start to send dollars, right? So I think that's sort of the high level that I've seen across the board. And that's sort of like how the thinking cap sort of starts to get on. But and that has to happen if people believe that this is the future, right? Like, once you're bought into it, and of course, there's people who've actually, you know, there's still skeptics, or like, I mean, I don't think anyone should drink the Kool-Aid, right? Like, I think you should get a taste for yourself, and then if it's great, then like, yeah, dip your toes in even further. But and I think skepticism is a good thing. Like, we shouldn't be like, you know, blindly believing everything that's told to us. So, but I think for anyone to sit back and go like, hey, this is complete horseshit, and like, no one should ever get into it. No one should put any money into it. I think you know, that's a fool's errand. I think they'll have to eat their words. That's my 2 cents. But Ken, curious to hear what you're seeing.
Yeah, just real quick and on, everyone kind of comes in at a different point on the learning curve. And everyone will have a different reason for choosing to learn. And some of those people are just naturally, want to do hard things. They want to take on challenges, and they're going to be attracted early on, and learning about it because it's still esoteric and it's still exclusive. I think that was very attractive early on. Now, there was that headline probably during 2017 or 2020, all your friends are getting rich and you're not, and now the late majority is born, and people are starting, not, all right, grand scheme of things, late majority is way down the road, right? But it's this feeling of, okay, now the mainstream has found out about this. Why don't I know about it? And just kind of tracing these patterns as they start to evolve. We can kind of see these cycles, be born, and they just keep growing the ecosystem. More people get involved, more of their friends want to get involved. And once they find out that it's also in their self-interest, I think at that point it just taps into the natural human instinct, and people are driven from there.
Yeah, I mean, I remember seeing this stuff in the very beginning of 2020, and just being like, what is going on here? It's just absolutely gnarly. It's been a great turn of events. So kind of wrapping things up here, Kedric and Anand, any closing thoughts on kind of where you guys are at with DeFi Masterclass? Anything that our audience should know? And yeah, guys, thanks so much for coming on.
Yeah, no, appreciate it. Yeah, I mean, what I say is we just released dates for our August cohort. If anybody's interested in kind of coming in, checking out, learning kind of directly from us on this, I would highly recommend checking that out. And yeah, I mean, again, we're still, the good thing is you're still really, really early in this space. And if this is going to be as big as we think it's going to be, you can't ignore this. This is something everybody has to pay attention to. And I say go out and quit your job and start working in DeFi. That's what we really need, is more hungry, smart people coming into the space and making this happen.
Sweet. And yeah, I mean, guys, it was an absolute pleasure to speak. I'm excited for future collaborations between DeFi Slate and DeFi Masterclass. And yeah, thanks for coming on, guys, and good luck out there.
Thanks very much. I appreciate it.